Welcome to the Still Curtain podcast. It's Monday, July 14th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are less than a month away from reporting to Latrobe for training camp. Well, less than a month. They'll be doing it later this month. It's right around the corner. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to take you around the AFC North a little bit. Perennially one of the toughest divisions in football, and I'm going to be ranking the offensive position groups 1 through 4 between the Steelers, Bengals, Browns, and Ravens. And I'm also going to be unveiling a little Still Curtain podcast preseason all AFC North team. These are the Steelers' most important opponents. How do they stack up on the offensive side of the ball? Do the Steelers have many players that are the best at their position in this division? Because step one of achieving any NFL goals is winning your division. That's really where everything starts. You got to win games in your division to get into the playoffs. You ideally got to win your division. The Steelers have not won this division since 2020, and it'll be a really tall task in 2025. Basically, every year until the Steelers get a long-term solution at quarterback, it's going to be a really tough uphill battle to win this division because this division is headlined by Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow, two of the big four quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Obviously, that being Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. Those are the four best quarterbacks in the league, pretty much undisputedly. They're all in the AFC, and two of them happen to be in the Steelers division in the AFC North. So if it wasn't hard enough to win in AFC North football, it's going to continue to get harder because Jackson and Burrow are just going to keep getting better. They're incredible young quarterbacks, and they're both still young quarterbacks, even though Jackson has 2 MVPs already through this point in his career and maybe should have had a third last season. So that'll bring me to the quarterback position for the positional rankings. That's where we're going to start. We're going to jump right into it. And obviously there's not a ton of intrigue. We know who the top 2 are going to be. I have it Jackson, then Burrow. I feel like that's, if not consensus, that's largely the way most people in the NFL would view it. I'm going to talk about those 2 later when discussing kind of the toughest calls on the preseason team. Where this is intriguing, obviously, Aaron Rodgers is going to slot in at number 3. And I'm not necessarily just doing the players at each position. I'm going to do the position groups. But for quarterback, you're just going to look at the starter. If we're getting into backups, things get very convoluted. And ideally for all of these teams, the starter is the one that's playing. Aaron Rodgers is not the same quarterback that he was. I've talked about this on previous episodes. He's very pressure sensitive at this point in his career. He's never been somebody who's super adept at like stepping up in the pocket and just navigating things like in a Brady-esque way because he was so athletic. He's going to get out of the pocket and try to buy some more time because his arm is so live off any platform and he can whip his hips around so effectively to create velocity to throw from any angle. And we've seen that lead to multiple MVP awards. And he's one of the most talented quarterbacks in the history of the game, one of the best of this generation easily. He's not that quarterback anymore. He's very quick game, get it out quickly. I think he can still use that off-platform ability to his advantage, throwing slants. He doesn't have to get his feet set very quickly. He can throw from a variety of arm angles and fire them in there. I think that quick game, some of that RPO stuff will be really effective for the Steelers this year. And then the deep ball, he's still a very capable and good deep ball thrower, though he probably does it a bit too much at this point in his career. But with the wide receiver core that he has, DK Metcalf leading that group, it's not that bad of an idea. So Aaron Rodgers is firmly 3 here. Still a viable NFL starting quarterback, probably, most likely, as long as he's willing to get hit a little bit. Last year, he wasn't willing to get hit at all, and that was incredibly detrimental. The arm is still mostly there. So can a cerebral quarterback with most of his arm strength still there find a way to create and manufacture enough offense? Probably. In my opinion, I'm not ready to make my full record prediction, but the Steelers are on the cusp of going to be a playoff team again, where they typically are, and Rodgers is certainly capable of leading them there. Number 4, the Cleveland Browns. Let's read some names. Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson likely out for the year with an Achilles injury, though there were some reports throughout the offseason that maybe he was going to come back earlier, but I can't imagine there's any chance he's going to be playing. He's simply on that roster because he got paid a fully guaranteed contract, one of the first in NFL history, and certainly the largest fully guaranteed contract in NFL history. And that was a bad bet, wouldn't you say? Flacco would be my guess of who wins that starting job. Dylan Gabriel's the quarterback I'm most interested in seeing out of that group more than Shedeur Sanders. I had Sanders ranked higher in my pre-draft ranking, so maybe that's hypocritical, but I do think Gabriel could do some nice things with Kevin Stefanski, getting back to what that offense used to look like with more outside zone and run game into play action and throws over the middle of the field. I think Gabriel's really good at that stuff. He's incredibly cerebral and he's pretty accurate. So I think there could be something of a functional offense there. And last year, the Browns offense was not remotely functional at all. I'm not going to stay on this too long because I don't think the Browns are going to be a very good team and certainly not a very good offense. Flacco is really at the end, and that resurgent run 2 years ago with the Browns was largely fueled by just deep ball volatility, and you're going to hit some deep balls and your offense is going to be good if you're doing it. And that dried up in the playoffs. And I just think that's the story for Flacco the rest of his career. And it's been a very successful career. The fact he even had a resurgence, incredibly impressive and unlikely. To the running back position. I think we know which team's going to slot in at number 1. It's the Baltimore Ravens with Derrick Henry and Justice Hill. Not only is Derrick Henry like the running back of this generation, and along with Saquon Barkley, clearly one of the best in the NFL, and maybe Christian McCaffrey if he's healthy again and what he was 2 years ago. Not only is that who Derrick Henry is, Justice Hill is kind of the perfect complement. Really nice player in the passing game, really functional in pass protection, and that's an overlooked aspect of building a running back room. Just the skills that you need to complement when Henry is your number 1 back. Justice Hill does that perfectly. I've always liked him. I liked him coming out of Oklahoma State years ago and thought he would find a niche in the NFL. It took a bit longer than I expected for him to be featured more, and he's still clearly running back 2 in that offense, but I like a lot of what Justice Hill does. And then there's the Derrick Henry of it all and the numbers advantage that the Ravens have in the backfield with Jackson and Henry and the constant conflict that teams are in and the Steelers were in, because the Ravens absolutely, not just in the playoff game, but throughout the entire season, just bullied the Steelers, and the Steelers had no answers for that run game and the multiplicity of it. I don't see that changing with Terrell Austin and Mike Tomlin still running the defense a year later. Lamar Jackson had his struggles against the Steelers early in his career, and then he didn't play the Steelers very often because he was often hurt or resting going into those games. And last year he was healthy, and last year he embarrassed the Steelers. So we can put an end to that narrative for sure. And there's a new one developing that the Ravens are certainly the kryptonite to the Steelers defense. Not that they're the only team that can torch the most expensive defense in the NFL, but specifically with this run game and what Derrick Henry creates. Now, is it going to continue in perpetuity? It can't, certainly, right into his 30s. Eventually, the wheels are going to start to fall off this thing. But Henry is just a different type of specimen than we've seen really in the NFL, the way he builds speed and just he's going to be good again this year. If he isn't what he was last season, he's still going to be very good. The Ravens, number 1 with a bullet. Number 2, 3, and 4 gets very interesting. And I actually made a change recently based off of recent news to bump the Steelers up to number 2. With the running back room of Caleb Johnson and Jaylen Warren. I'm definitely into that room. I'm into seeing what that balance looks like. I think they both fit much better in the Arthur Smith outside zone heavy offense than Najee Harris did. I know that they both fit better in that because Warren was better at it than Harris last season. And Caleb Johnson was just the best outside zone runner in this year's draft. And the Steelers got him in the 3rd round. I think he probably should have been a 2nd round pick, but he didn't run very well in the 40. I don't care about that because it plays. 4, 5, 7, I think it was. It plays in pads. And the way he builds speed on the outside zone, the way he maintains it through that one cut kind of style of running when he finds the crease, he's so good on pitches. I've said that all offseason, and I feel like I keep talking about it every time I talk about Caleb Johnson, but just he finds ways to take a pitch, a toss play, which Smith was really trying to shoehorn Najee Harris into being that type of player. Caleb Johnson, just the way, because of how he builds speed, because of his vision, which is much superior to Najee Harris's. That's not a joke based off of the 4th of July eye injury with Najee Harris. Before that, Johnson's vision was much better than Harris's. And I think that's going to work really well in tandem with what the Steelers are trying to do offensively. So I have the Steelers at number 2. There's still a very big question mark because running back 1 is an unproven rookie, but I would, if you're, a fantasy person, be very interested in Caleb Johnson. I don't know what the average draft position is or anything. I'm not nearly as into fantasy as I once was, but when I get ready for it and draft season comes around in about a month from now, Caleb Johnson's going to be pretty high up on my board. I'm really intrigued to what he's going to do with this offense. So the Steelers at number 2. Number 3, I'll go with the Browns. Browns and Bengals is really close, and the Steelers are too. 2, 3, and 4 at running in the running back group is really close. The Browns is contingent, and the reason I moved them down from number 2, contingent on what happens with the Quinshon Judkins domestic violence arrest over the weekend. Very concerning if he cannot play. A room of Jerome Ford and Dylan Sampson is not nearly as interesting as Jerome Ford, Quinshon Judkins, and Dylan Sampson. I really like Judkins. I really like Sampson. I think they did a great job drafting multiple players at that position to build a very multiple running back room in terms of what they're able to do running the ball. Judkins, more physical. Sampson, really good vision and runs gap scheme stuff really well. I think they both can do zone and gap, but Sampson runs gap scheme stuff really well because he has awesome vision for that in a way that kind of Kyron Williams does. And then the Bengals, I have them at number 4. Chase Brown is finally the explosive back that they've been wanting in Cincinnati. And he's actually the pass catcher that Joe Mixon wasn't. So Chase Brown is probably coming off of last season when he emerged and caught 54 passes for 360 and 4 touchdowns, giving Burrow an outlet that he's desperately needed throughout his career. Probably the best that the Bengals feel about their running back situation since Burrow's come to the league. And Mixon was a very good player. Maybe that name carried a little bit more value than he actually did as a player because of his limitations in the passing game and lack of explosiveness as a runner. I think Chase Brown is much more explosive. If the offensive line is there, then I'm interested in what the Cincinnati run game can look like. And we'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. The Judkins thing complicates this ranking, but I feel good about Steelers 2, Browns 3, and Bengals at number 4, just because behind Chase Brown, Zach Moss, Samaje Perine. Perine's a really good blocker, really good in the passing game. But that just doesn't, even Taj Brooks, the rookie out of Texas Tech that they drafted, that doesn't really get the juices flowing for me the way that a Judkins Sampson duo does, or the way that just Caleb Johnson on his own as a draft pick does. So a lot of rookie running backs in this division. I'm most intrigued by Sampson or by Johnson. So Steelers at number 2. Wide receiver. I don't know that this is particularly difficult. Bengals 1. They might be number 1 in the league, if not the Eagles. I saw a PFF ranking that had Eagles 1, Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2, and Bengals 3. I think that's leaning too heavily on like the depth of options because the Bucs have They have Godwin, they drafted Emeka Egbuka, they have Mike Evans, but they don't have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, which in my opinion is the best duo in the NFL and is going to be a massive problem for the Steelers to deal with, which is another reason that the Jalen Ramsey trade is so interesting and will be intriguing to watch what they do with Ramsey against the Bengals. Minka Fitzpatrick, for all his abilities or limitations at this point in his career, was not going to man up on either Chase or Higgins or really anyone in that offense other than maybe Mike Gesicki. Now, does Ramsey shadow Jamar Chase? Is he capable of that at this point in his career? Is he better suited to have a physical battle with Higgins, but then can Joey Porter Jr. handle his time with Jamar Chase? I think it's going to be interesting to see the first matchup between those two teams. The Bengals easily number one. The way the Ravens are at running back, the Bengals are at wide receiver in easy number one in the AFC North. Then the Ravens at number two with Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins at 33 years old. The Hopkins addition, interesting, gives them something they don't really have at this point. He's just mostly a possession guy. And I think he's best as a big slot, which Zay Flowers does a lot out of the slot, but he's not primarily a slot. He's more an outside guy. And it gives them, people talk a lot at wide receiver about like building the basketball team in terms of you want to build out your room with very different types of players. The power forward that's, going to go up and get the contested catches like a T. Higgins, and a shooting guard or a point guard who's a jittery slot guy. Like, there's not a one-to-one comparison necessarily, and you probably aren't going to have 5 good ones, but the thought process being you just get these different types of players. The Ravens have done a really nice job of that to support Lamar Jackson. Early in his career, it was a big problem. Rashad Bateman has come into his own now that he's healthier. I think he's interesting over the middle of the field. I think Zay Flowers is really explosive behind the line of scrimmage. I know that. Yards after catch, he's a monster. So I'm intrigued by that receiving group. They don't typically play well against the Steelers, it feels like. But that's a much improved group from what it was early in Jackson's career. And, it's not talked about a ton with the way the Ravens lost to the Bills in the playoffs, and that was so gut-wrenching. But that game was without Zay Flowers on the field. He wasn't healthy, and they nearly knocked off the Bills if it wasn't for a Mark Andrews drop 2-point conversion, and before that, a Mark Andrews fumble. They would have won or gone to overtime, certainly, if he would have hung on to the 2-point conversion. So that's a really good group. The Steelers and the Browns are similar in that they both have a clear number one and not much after it. I went with the Steelers 3 and the Browns 4 because I think DK Metcalf is a better player than Jerry Jeudy. Jeudy had his best year in the league last season, an insanely high target share when Jameis Winston was the quarterback. That's kind of Winston's MO. He's going to try to force the ball to his best receivers. It's not a terrible strategy, especially as a backup quarterback now at this point in his career. Jeudy is a savvy route runner. He's actually more of a field stretcher at this point than he was with Denver, especially out of the slot, and that's intriguing. But beyond him, it's Cedric Tillman, who's a big physical outside guy who can be your X, but I just don't think he's a very good one. So, okay, yes, you have the different styles of receiver that everybody kind of goes for, but when they're not particularly good, then what does that really translate to in terms of impact and effectiveness? Jamari Thrash out of Louisville, he's in his second year out of Louisville, is probably their number 3. So it falls off quickly. And the Steelers do too, certainly. Metcalf, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson. There's at least a bit more hope with Roman Wilson will be something. And Robert Woods, while at this point in his career, he's not what he was with the Rams on those high-flying early McVay offenses or even other stops since then. But he's a really good blocker. And that's incredibly valuable with the way offense is transforming. And I'll get into that a little bit right now, talking about the tight ends. But at wide receiver, Bengals 1, Ravens 2, Steelers 3, Browns 4. Tight end. A long preface before I get into the rankings, because tight end has quickly become one of the most important positions in the league, just based on league-wide offensive trends. And there's a huge rise last season. I think the highest in the tracking era of 12 personnel. It is the way 11 personnel was when McVay started in 2016, 17, 2017. And that started proliferating throughout the NFL when everyone realized you can just have a slot receiver out there all the time. Now the league has gone away from those spread offenses and multiple receiver sets to much more condensed stuff, multiple tight ends and 12 personnel. For those that don't know, 1 running back, 2 tight ends. If you hear the numbering system, 11, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 12, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 21, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, and then the rest are receivers to fill out the 11-man offense. In case you didn't know that, I feel like that's come pretty common terminology in NFL media and everything. But in case you didn't know, so 12 personnel, 2 tight ends. It really helps the offense dictate who's on the field defensively. And if the defense stays light against it, it gives you a significant advantage in the run game. And that's risen, 12 personnel has risen hand in hand with the increased condensed formations, which are also a McVay and Shanahan thing, and the increase in the run game, because the best offenses in the NFL now are ones that can dominate on the ground. The Bills, the Eagles weren't statistically one of the best offenses in the NFL, but you get the picture with that, because by the end of the season they were. The Ravens, even the Packers had a great run game last year. And a lot of that comes with multiple tight ends on the field. It helps exploit the personnel advantage, right? It forces the defense to declare who's going to be on the field. Are you playing the pass? Are you playing the run? Okay, now we can attack you either way, because, if you have tight ends that are capable blockers and capable receivers, you have a lot of variability offensively in that case. And it helps exploit the personnel advantage against defenses that got a lot smaller to deal with RPO and spread offense era, right? 2017, 2018, everything spread out, everything's an RPO. You can't play zone against the RPO stuff. You got to play man, you got to match up with the linebackers. You need fast linebackers to get to the perimeter, and there's cover so much space in the middle of the field. And now offenses have realized, okay, they got lighter defensive tackles to try to get to the edges more for outside zone running stuff. They got lighter linebackers to try to run sideline to sideline. Now the spine of that defense is much lighter. Let's hit them in the mouth and run it like we used to in the early 2000s and in the 90s. And so everything is cyclical in football. That cycle is coming back around. The run game was huge last year. It'll continue to be huge this year, especially with multiple tight ends on the field. Hence the Jonnu Smith trade for the Steelers. And that's a reason to be really, not really high on the Steelers offense, but higher on the Steelers offense this year than last, among a bevy of other things. 4x1 formations are also very huge right now in the NFL. That's a big trend. That's something that Mina Kimes and Dan Orlovsky talked about on the Mina Kimes show, which is one of the best NFL podcasts, in case you're looking for more NFL content. We have a lot of great stuff as well at FanSided Stacking the Box. But from that show specifically, they talked a lot about the increases in 4x1 formations, because the way they can impact the run game as well, particularly with condensed sets. You have 4 eligible receivers to one side, 1 to the other. You can get multiple tight ends on that 4 side. You can get tight ends matched up against defensive backs in the run game, right? Like, you can get offensive tackles against defensive backs at times if you play that numbers advantage so much and want to run to that side, run to the strength of the formation like that. I think the Steelers will do a lot of that with even 3 tight ends on the field next season with Freiermuth, with Smith, and with Darnell Washington. So I like investing in that position group at this point in the cyclical nature in the NFL offense cycle. Um, Even the Bengals, which were and have been incredibly rigid in their 11 personnel usage. Zach Taylor, their head coach, came off the McVay tree when they were really heavy in 11. McVay is no longer a primary, like he still uses a ton of 11, but does it very differently and does a lot more with gap scheme running and more tight ends on the field. Zach Taylor has not made that change, mostly because of what his quarterback is best at. Burrow's superpower is his vision and decision making and manipulating defenses when things are more static, so they don't have the rise in motion that the rest of the league does. It's a lot of static 11, reading things out, old like Peyton Manning stuff almost. Burrow's just so good at it, you have to run the offense that way. But even the Bengals increased their 12 personnel usage a lot last year, especially when Eric All, their rookie out of Michigan, was very healthy and they had a lot of success running the ball. That is intriguing for one of the offenses that everyone in the league kind of just expected is going to in and around the league and observing the league just kind of expected for a long time was going to just stay very stuck in its ways. With that being said, I still have the Bengals at number 4 in the tight end rankings. I have the Ravens with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. They're a perfect example of putting multiple big bodies on the field that can block, that can be impactful in the passing game. Likely is more of a glorified receiver, but he still has a big enough body that if you put a smaller nickel out there, you can run right at him and Likely will give the effort in the run game to give you an advantage. So that's still really important, really impactful. Even coming off the fumble and the drop, Mark Andrews still the best tight end in this division. The Ravens are number 1. The Steelers are number 2, right behind them though, especially with how talented and how deep that group is. And it's a lot of different types of tight ends, which I think is really smart team building by Omar Khan. Jonnu Smith is somebody that Arthur Smith has loved for a really long time. So it's not surprising that they went and got Jonnu Smith for Arthur Smith, but he fits really well in building, if you're building the basketball team, but just in the tight end room, right? Freiermuth is so good over the middle of the field. He runs a lot of seams and kind of benders over the middle. He's that type of tight end. Also has the blocking in his repertoire. Jonnu Smith is like one of the best tight ends in the league on screens and quick hitters and just get the ball in his hands quickly. The Steelers started about 3 games last year with the Wilson under center play action, rollout, dump off to Darnell Washington. He rumbles for 11 yards. And while, yes, Washington is really difficult to tackle, you do that with Jonnu Smith, it might be 15, it might be 20 because he's much more explosive runner. Still very difficult to tackle. So I think a lot of the stuff like that will be in the Steelers' repertoire, and that'll help keep the passing game viable despite some of the deficiencies in Rodgers' game at this point in his career. So the Steelers are at number 2. And then obviously Darnell Washington he's a pass catcher. He's impressed me with like actually being able to run routes and catch the ball away from his body. And he's way more coordinated than you'd think at his massive size, but he's best served as an extra offensive lineman. And that's super valuable, right? Like the Bills, one of their superpowers last year was the 6-man offensive line, just bringing an extra body out there and being more physical, running a ton of duo stuff and just getting James Cook downhill. That run game was really effective because of that. Steelers can do that without actually, bringing an extra offensive lineman out there. And I think that gives you some more versatility. The Browns at number 3, David Njoku leading that group. They have multiple bodies there as well. They're going to have to be very important as Kevin Stefanski kind of veers back into his old ways now that he's free of Deshaun Watson for the most part. And then the Bengals at number 4. I talked about their increased usage. This is a pretty good division by tight end talent. So they're not quite there, but Gesicki is essentially a slot receiver, a big slot. That's what he's always been throughout his career. That's what he was at Penn State. But still a useful player for them, a very useful player for them, gives them a different look, especially they have Yoshivas, he was a rookie or second year guy, but young receiver. And they've been able to change those two out with Higgins and with Chase. It allows them to move Chase around more and more, put him in the slot sometimes. When Yoshivas is out there, you can have Chase and Higgins on the outside with Gesicki in the slot. It just gives them a real different look in an offense that we didn't expect to have a lot of different looks. So, and then if all gets back healthy, it'll be interesting to see what they do with 12 personnel and Burrow going under center, and if they incorporate more of that stuff in this year as they did early last season when all was healthy. Now to the offensive line. Ranked this obviously as a group, like I have the other ones, but then in the preseason all AFC North first team offense, essentially is what it is. I ranked positional, like individuals at position, and built an offensive line. So we'll go through that as well. So the Browns, they're an interesting place to start in this preface before I get to the rankings, because they have a lot of familiar names who have been there a very long time through multiple iterations of this offense, but they were not good at all last year, individually and collectively as a unit. Will they be better when Stefanski and Cleveland and this offense gets back to what they used to do so well? The outside zone stuff, into power and gap scheme stuff more, instead of the shotgun mid-zone type of running you have to do when you want to run a spread offense for Deshaun Watson. And Stefanski, to his credit for being flexible as a coach, right? It was ultimately to his detriment because Watson, it just wasn't the player that he was in Houston anymore. But to his credit, was able to reconfigure this offense into a spread system and try to make it work. It didn't. Now he's going to go back to the tried and true stuff. And I think that's really valuable. I think that's what happened when Flacco took over 2 years ago after Watson got hurt. They were able to get back to more of the under center. They were able to get back to play action and outside zone stuff. That's when the offensive line gets rolling. Because a few years ago, you think back, this is one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. It was a real strength of this team, especially in 20 and 21. That's not the case anymore, but a lot of those players are still there, especially Wyatt Teller and Joel Bitonio at right and left guard, respectively. Teller might still be the man, though. Last year, Jerome Ford averaged 12.6 yards per carry on 18 runs between the right guard and right tackle, which, behind the right guard, primarily Teller's responsibility there. And the Browns as a team averaged 6.8 yards per attempt on those right guard runs. That's not nothing. So Teller might still be that dude. And if they can reclaim some things with their old identity, that could be a strength of their roster. The Bengals still have the same problems that they've ever had with Joe Burrow, right? The 21 draft, 22, 21 was the debate. Yeah, the 21 draft, the debate of, do you draft Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell, right? And it was like Joe Burrow, the meme of the quarterback getting sacked, throwing to Jamar Chase, or Penei Sewell blocking and throwing to anybody. Ultimately, they've been vindicated in their decision to draft Jamar Chase. That doesn't mean they've built a good offensive line really at any point throughout Burrow's career. It's been better at times, especially when they made the Super Bowl. Last year, it was not good. That kind of unlocked a new level of Burrow, though, with his escape ability and creation on second reaction plays. But you don't want to force your quarterback into that. So they've tried to reconfigure things a little bit at the guard spots, brought in journeyman Lucas Patrick, third round pick Dylan Fairchild, but the line is still a clear weakness for that offense. For the Steelers, the offensive line is insanely young. If it all clicks, it could be one of the best units in the NFL because they've invested in it that way with 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, a high-priced free agent in Sayamalu. High price before the guard boom, right? He's not a high-priced guard now, but was at the time. And then the Ravens, they lost Patrick McCarry, but were able to keep Ronnie Stanley, and that was massive, especially because last year Ronnie Stanley finally got healthy again and finally became Ronnie Stanley again. So Patrick McCarry not there, one of the more versatile offensive linemen in the NFL, kind of like the idealized version of what the Steelers wanted Matt Filer to be years ago, right? When he was a guard and he was a tackle, he can do both. Could he? Not as well as McCarry, certainly. But even without him, I have the Ravens at number 1. I said it's a strong division for tight ends, pretty strong division for quarterbacks, really weak division for offensive lines. The Ravens at number 1, some of that maybe is the way that Lamar Jackson mitigates the impact of, and Derrick Henry too, just mitigate the impact of the offensive line because you're constantly playing with a numbers advantage in the run game, right? You're playing 11 on 11 football because your quarterback is such a threat with the ball in his hands. You have a quarterback who can take these uniquely deep drops that allow him time to like climb towards the line of scrimmage and scramble. And he's just so elusive and evasive and creative as a thrower. So maybe their offensive line looks better because of the quarterback, but that quarterback's still going to be back there this year. So I'll put the Ravens at number 1, the Steelers at number 2, the Browns at number 3, and the Bengals at number 4. The Steelers and the Browns, both, in my opinion, could be the best in this division. That's not a particularly high bar, but they could be like top 10 offensive lines in the league. For the Steelers, if it all comes together for the young guys. For the Browns, if their aging vets recapture what they once were on an offensive line that used to be a dominant unit, not just Bitonio and Teller, but also Jack Conklin at right tackle. And they have Dawan Jones at left tackle, who's, just a very interesting player who he could be a high upside guy if it comes together for him. So those are my offensive line rankings, the positional rankings in the AFC North. And that brings us to the all AFC North offense. And this is just a good exercise to see like how many Steelers actually would be if you made an all-star team from the AFC North. How many Steelers would actually be on it and would actually start? It may not be as many as you think. Before we get to that, though, if you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and Pittsburgh Steelers football, if you're a fan of the Steel Curtain podcast, please like and subscribe. We really appreciate your support on YouTube, on Spotify, everywhere. That's it for messages. To the all AFC North offense. The quarterback. You guessed it, and I gave it away earlier. It's Lamar Jackson. It certainly wasn't going to be Aaron Rodgers. It's Lamar Jackson. He should have won the MVP last year. Really tough decision between he and Burrow, but it's Jackson for me. And I don't know how I would really rank the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but I would have a really tough time keeping Jackson out of that conversation. But we'll run through this and then I'll get into what some of my toughest calls were. At running back, Derrick Henry. Let's keep it moving. At wide receiver 1, Jamar Chase. Wide receiver 2, T. Higgins. In the slot, Zay Flowers. You want to come at me and say Zay Flowers doesn't play in the slot enough? He would on this team. But if not, it would be Jerry Jeudy. It's not going to be anyone on the Steelers. It's not going to be Calvin Austin or Roman Wilson, unproven guys. There are better options throughout the rest of the AFC North. Tight end. I don't care about the fumble and the drop. Mark Andrews was still one of the best tight ends in the NFL last year. If you made me go number 2, I might even go David Njoku. He's just such a good blocker, and that's so valuable and underrated, both at the tight end position and at the wide receiver position now, with the proliferation of the run game and those condensed splits that I talked about. So it's going to be Andrews there. Freiermuth maybe would have a case. I actually think Jonnu Smith would maybe have a better case than Freiermuth. He was a Pro Bowler last year, had an amazing season with Miami. But it's Mark Andrews until proven otherwise, till we see that real decline from the aging veteran. And then the preseason all AFC North offensive line. Left tackle Ronnie Stanley, left guard Isaac Seumalo. That was a tough one. He's the only Steeler on this list. Center Tyler Linderbaum, another tough one. Really would like to give it to Zach Frazier. Linderbaum's just done it a little bit longer. Right guard, I'll go Wyatt Teller. Mason McCormick, maybe. Like there's a lot of upside there, but I'm not going to predict it. I would bank on Teller reclaiming his previous form. And as I mentioned, the Browns had a lot of success running his way last year. And then right tackle Roger Rosengarten. That was another difficult one. Not to necessarily belabor that too much. It's not going to be Broderick Jones. We haven't seen much from Fautanu, who's going to be over there this year. So that one, the Steelers really aren't in consideration. But again, the things that Jackson does as a quarterback kind of mitigate any issues on the offensive line in a really meaningful way. Sticking on this offensive line, before I go back to the quarterback position and some of the other Steelers who could have been close, Frazier or Linderbaum, right? Frazier was incredible last year. Just everything you could imagine that the Steelers fans wanted him to be in their wildest dreams. He was rock solid right from the beginning of the year and is going to be one of the best centers in the NFL. Linderbaum already is one of the best centers in the NFL. I mean, Frazier is too, but Linderbaum's just done it a little bit longer. Ultimately, that was the difference for me. I gave it to Linderbaum on doing it a little bit longer. And I also think he's a little bit more athletic in some of the ways, maybe not quite what Marquise Pouncey was, getting out in front of screens and things like that. The Ravens don't do a ton of that stuff, but he has that athleticism. He had that coming out of Iowa. I'll just give it to Linderbaum. It feels safe. It feels like the right decision, but Frazier absolutely making a push. And then elsewhere on the offensive line, Joel Bitonio or Seumalo at left guard. That's a close one. Could go either way. Seumalo was better last season. Bitonio's been a Pro Bowler in his career and has hit higher ceilings. They're both aging. I'll give it to Seumalo. We get a Steeler on there. I can sneak a Steeler on there at left guard, but other than that, I mean, I don't know that anyone would expect the Steelers to have a ton on this all AFC North offense, but just one player, not maybe the best sign for how their offense stacks up against the rest of the AFC North. But when you look at the Bengals, right? Number 1 at wide receiver, number 4 at offensive line. When you look at the Ravens, they have, they're pretty bulletproof. But at least the Bengals have some weaknesses, and the Steelers find themselves in the middle a lot. It was going to be my point when I realized that the Ravens are just completely bulletproof on the offensive side of the ball. But, if one of those groups clicks, particularly the offensive line, the Steelers needed to be the offensive line in a really big way. If that offensive line comes together, Broderick Jones is more comfortable at left tackle, Seumalo keeps his level, Frazier takes even another step, and Fautanu's healthy and just road grading over on the right side. Even maybe Mason McCormick, makes good on some of that potential that the Steelers saw when they drafted him. And some of the flashes he showed last year. Then that could be one of the better offensive lines, not just in this division. It could easily be the best in this division. One of the better ones in football, and drastically change the Steelers' outlook and what what the end of season all AFC North offense looks like. That's the area of greatest growth potential for the Steelers. Other close calls, Rosengarten and Jack Conklin at right tackle. It's just a matter of who you betting. Are you betting on a resurgent year from Conklin and a more familiar offense, or Rosengarten, who's blocking for Lamar Jackson, who's just doesn't get sacked? So, that's not truly right tackle play, essentially, but I'm just going to bank on the infrastructure with Baltimore. Um, at wide receiver, another interesting one before I get to the quarterback position, and I know that's not Steelers heavy, but that's where I want to end this because I think it's probably the most interesting conversation and one that Steelers fans probably need to hear a little bit about what Lamar Jackson is. And they learned, Steelers fans that weren't sold learned last year. But just a reminder before we go into the season would be good. DK Metcalf at wide receiver. I didn't go like, I know I listed wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. I didn't go wide receiver 2 against other wide receiver 2s. I just went the best wide receivers. Um, so Metcalf would be compared against Higgins and not against Chase. No way he's going to surpass Jamar Chase, who might be the best receiver in the NFL, right there with Justin Jefferson. I like what Chase does after the catch a little bit better, but just a few more drops and things. That's really splitting hairs between two generational players. DK Metcalf against T. Higgins. T. Higgins, in my opinion, is just too good. They have similar games, but Higgins is a better contested catch player. That's one of the strengths of Metcalf, right? Those go balls, using his physicality. T. Higgins has way better body control and savvy and connection with his quarterback. And that's not just with Burrow versus Metcalf with Rodgers, who he's never played with, but it's Metcalf with Geno Smith, who he played with for years. Like, he doesn't have that sixth sense the same way Higgins and Burrow do of, oh, this is coming on the back shoulder. I need the ball placed here. And adjusting to where the quarterback's going to throw you open. Last season, T. Higgins went 14 of 30 on contested catch opportunities. Metcalf was 15 of 41. A fairly significant discrepancy, and I think a lot of that has to do with, like I said, that body control, that savvy. Despite being the number 2 option to Chase, Higgins finished with 2.05 yards per route run, which is a really good efficiency metric for wide receiver. How productive are you being for the routes that you're out there on the field running, the snaps that you're out there on the field running a route? That's compared to Metcalf's 1.81 in Seattle as the number 1 wide receiver. Jackson Smith and Jigba started to cut into his claim as number 1 wide receiver and emerge, but that's largely because of Metcalf's limitations. So I don't think there's an argument that, Smith and Jigba took away enough to level that off, especially when Higgins is playing with Jamar Chase. Metcalf is a better yak player, like yards after the catch, ball in his hand over the middle. He's kind of a freight train, especially on those deep crossers, but not enough to overcome the difference in route running and body control and contested catch ability that Higgins is just one of the probably 10, 12 best wide receivers in the NFL. Metcalf is probably in the top 20 to 25. So he was somebody who was close, but not quite there. And then before I close, about the quarterback dispute, the quarterback position, I went with Lamar Jackson. If I had an MVP vote last year, I would have gone with Lamar Jackson. You could throw a Burrow's playoff track record around if you want. He's made a Super Bowl. Lamar hasn't. But I'm really not going to hear that after how good Lamar was against the Bills last year. He had the early interception, but they lost on a Mark Andrews fumble and a 2-point conversion drop. Jackson led them down to score the touchdown before the 2-point conversion drop. He was magical on that drive. Really just unstoppable in that game. Unstoppable last season. He led the NFL in QBR last season. He was second to Burrow in total EPA. And that's when you factor in, Burrow was constantly coming back in games or playing in shootouts because of a terrible defense. Jackson had one of the best defenses in the NFL on the other side, and he still finished second in total expected points added. Jackson threw for 4,172 yards, 41 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions, and he ran for 915 yards and 4 touchdowns. Should have won another MVP award. He had the 4th best passer rating in NFL history last year. That doesn't account for his rushing ability, right? That's just truly as a passer. Lamar Jackson is easily one of the best pocket passers in the entire NFL. against winning teams last year. And it's not just beating up, because I think early in his career, some of it was, you could make an argument that some of it was Jackson runs up the yardage and touchdowns against bad teams, and then the Steelers would keep him in check, and other good defenses would keep him in check. The Chargers did in that playoff game with the, tons of defensive backs out there, 5-6 defensive backs on the field. Last year, Jackson generated 0.27 EPA per play against teams with winning records. That's just a staggering number, incredibly efficient, incredibly impactful. For me, he's clearly the best quarterback in the division above Burrow, and I'm about as big of a Burrow fan as you could be. Burrow's one of the 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL. To me, that's undisputable. He got demonstrably better last season. He leveraged his athleticism in a way he hasn't before to buy time in and out of the pocket, hunt for bigger plays. He also got more, he was more willing to just take checkdowns, possibly because Chase Brown actually did something with them, but possibly because he learned that you can just be incredibly efficient if you negate negative plays. And Burrow early in his career was boom or bust kind of swing for the fences quarterback, take a lot of deep shots, take a lot of sacks. He's really cut out the sacks in a huge way. And last year was his best season as an NFL quarterback, but it was not as good as Lamar Jackson's was. So Steelers fans, I think anyone who is saying Lamar Jackson's not good, not elite, whatever argument you want to make, can't beat the Steelers, Steelers have his number. That was sort of true for a while, but I think everyone learned their lesson in the playoff game. But if anyone comes with any of that this season, just listen to the last few minutes of this podcast, because Lamar Jackson is a dominant force in the NFL, and specifically last season against the Steelers. He just absolutely, the Ravens offense absolutely torched the Steelers. And I imagine that's going to continue to happen, because he's not going to get any worse. He's not getting, not yet 30, still probably ascending as a player. And that's just a terrifying, terrifying thought, especially when the Steelers have to try to match him with an offense that, as we learned today, has just one player on my preseason all AFC North offense. That's going to do it for me today. Appreciate everyone watching along, listening along. Make sure we're going to be upping the frequency of the shows as we get closer and closer to the season. So until we get to the season, when I go to instant reaction shows right after the game, I'm going to be in this typical slot on Mondays at 1:30. Next Monday, you guessed it, we're doing the AFC North preseason defense. Taking a look where, does TJ Watt fit in on that team? It's a bigger question than you might think. Where's Cam Hayward on that team? Is he cracking the starting unit? And Jalen Ramsey, what does that look like against the best defensive players in one of the best divisions in football? That'll do it for me today. Thanks again. Thanks to everyone with FanSided producing this and getting this up on Spotify and all the different platforms. Make sure you like and subscribe, particularly on YouTube. We really appreciate that support. Till next time, as always, go Steelers.